She placed a king on the throne and saved an entire kingdom from ruin. So why did that very monarch who owed her everything silently watch as she, like a wild beast, was prepared for the most agonizing punishment medieval Europe had ever known? What turned the living embodiment of hope, a national heroine, into heretic number one, into a witch doomed to the purifying fire of the stake? A 19-year-old peasant girl who had single-handedly turned the tide of the 100 Years' War now sat, bound by a heavy chain to a wooden block in a grim, damp English fortress in Rouen. She was guarded by the very same soldiers whose army she had recently crushed at Orléans and Patay, and whose hearts were filled not with respect for a valiant enemy, but with a burning, primal hatred and superstitious fear. The woman who had returned the crown to France was to be destroyed by men obsessed with a single idea to prove that she was not a messenger of God, but a dangerous sorceress who had made a pact with the devil. For if that were so, then the king she had crowned was nothing more than a usurper who had received his power from the hands of evil itself. It all began on May 23, 1430, a fateful day when Burgundian troops, the long-standing and faithful allies of the English in this protracted war, captured Joan of Arc during a desperate sortie outside the walls of the besieged city of Compiègne. In their hands, they held the most valuable and, at the same time, the most dangerous captive in all of France, a living symbol of the French revival and of divine favor for the House of Valois, whose very existence called into question all of the English conquests. The English, humiliated by a whole series of crushing defeats, understood perfectly well, as long as Joan was alive, as long as the people's faith in her divine mission lived on, their hold on French lands hung by a thread. She was not just a military leader, she was an idea, and ideas cannot be killed by a sword on the battlefield. They must be discredited, trampled into the mud, burned at the stake of public opinion, so that the very smoke from that fire would poison the hope in the hearts of the French. Joan's capture was a true gift of fate for them, a chance to overturn the chessboard and win back all their lost games with a single, yet brilliantly cruel move. To them, she was not a prisoner of war, but the key to the political annihilation of their enemy. In November of that same year, a cynical deal was struck. The English, acting through the regent of France, the Duke of Bedford, paid the Burgundians a colossal sum of 10,000 livres tournois. This price was equivalent to the ransom for a prince of the blood or the cost of 1,000 war horses, and it turned a living saint into an expensive commodity. She was moved to Rouen, a city that was not merely a fortress but the administrative and political capital of all English-occupied France. It was their main stronghold, a symbol of their power, and it was here that they decided to stage a show trial that was intended to shake the foundations of the French kingdom. By December, Joan found herself in the icy dungeons of the castle of Bouvreuil, an impregnable citadel under the personal control of the Earl of Warwick. This man was one of the most powerful and ruthless English lords, the guardian of the young King Henry VI, and he was personally responsible for ensuring the prisoner survived until the trial in the condition they required. The English had not simply bought a captive who could be exchanged or quietly eliminated in a dungeon. They had acquired the perfect instrument capable of destroying the very legitimacy of King Charles VII, whom Joan had led to his coronation in Reims, the Sacred Heart of the French monarchy. For, if it could be proven that he was crowned by a witch acting at the instigation of Satan, then the king himself would be nothing more than an impostor. All his power, all his claims to the throne would collapse in an instant. The political game had begun, and the fate of an entire kingdom was at stake, and Joan was but a pawn on this bloody chessboard. On January 3rd, 1431, an official decree was issued, accusing Joan of numerous religious crimes from idolatry to witchcraft. Her fate was to be decided by an ecclesiastical tribunal, a court of the Holy Inquisition. But was this court truly a court of faith, or merely a political farce dressed in a cassock and robe? The English placed Pierre Cauchon, Bishop of Beauvais, at the head of the trial. He was the ideal candidate for the dirty work, a man whose personal grievances and ambitions made him a compliant tool. Cauchon was not just a judge, he was an exile, a politician, and an avenger. He had been driven from his own see by the advancing troops of Charles VII. He had lost all his influence and must have craved revenge with indomitable force. His loyalty to the Anglo-Burgundian cause was beyond doubt, and his ambitions demanded the favor of his new masters, who could reward him generously for his diligence, perhaps even with the archiepiscopal see of Rouen. The charges were formulated cunningly, subtly, and mercilessly, turning her every feat into a crime and her every vision into a conversation with demons. Wearing men's clothing in violation of biblical law, claims of receiving divine visions, and most importantly, the refusal to submit to the authority of the earthly, militant church, if its decisions contradicted the will of the heavenly church. The trial was meant to answer a single question: were Joan's victories an act of divine will, or the work of a heretic led by demons? The future of two kingdoms depended on the answer. The formal interrogations began on February 21, 1431, in the oppressive atmosphere of the royal chapel of the Rouen castle. Joan, weakened by months of imprisonment but unbroken in spirit, was led into the hall where Bishop Cauchon and 42 assessors were already waiting for her. These were carefully selected clerics, mostly professors and doctors of theology from the University of Paris, which was under complete English control. Dozens of scholarly cold eyes were fixed on the lone figure of the girl, still bound in heavy chains. She was made to swear an oath on the Gospels to speak only the truth. But even here, in the face of mortal danger, she showed an unbending will and an astonishingly sharp mind that stumped the most experienced theologians. Joan agreed to take the oath, but with one important reservation. She declared that she would not reveal anything concerning her visions for the King of France, or anything that might compromise Charles VII in any way. She placed loyalty to her monarch above her own safety, never suspecting that he had long since written her off, considering her too expensive, inconvenient, and politically dangerous a figure. From February 21 to March 24th, Joan endured nearly a dozen grueling public interrogations, each lasting several hours without a break. It was not a conversation, but a true psychological torture, an intellectual beating. Learned theologians, masters of casuistry and scholastic debates relentlessly pressed her from all sides, trying to confuse, provoke, catch her on a word, and force her to contradict herself. They returned time and again to what they considered three key questions: the nature of her voices, her refusal to submit to the church, and her persistent, defiant wearing of men's clothing. The judges tried to catch her in cunning theological traps, asking questions to which any direct answer could be interpreted as heresy. The most famous was a question posed to her by one of the most insidious interrogators, Jean Beaupère. Did she believe she was in a state of God's grace? Joan, an uneducated peasant girl, instantly understood the diabolical trick. Church doctrine held that no mortal could know for certain if they possessed God's grace, as this would be a manifestation of pride. If she had answered yes, she would have been immediately accused of the mortal sin of pride and of contradicting church doctrine, declared a presumptuous heretic. If she had answered no, she would have essentially admitted that her visions and mission could not be from God, for the Lord does not act through sinners. For a moment, a tense silence fell over the hall. The judges anticipated their triumph, certain they had cornered her. The girl's answer astonished them and went down in history. She calmly and firmly said, "If I am not, may God put me there, and if I am, may God so keep me." Even her most ardent tormentors could not find a shred of heresy in these words. They were stunned by her wisdom. The initial list of charges drawn up by the chief prosecutor, Jean d'Estève, consisted of 70 articles, each intended to prove her guilt. But Joan defended herself with such astonishing intelligence, dignity, and simple, clear logic that many of these accusations crumbled, unable to withstand scrutiny. She parried the blows with such resourcefulness that some of the clerics accustomed to scholarly disputations began to openly express doubts about the legitimacy of the proceedings. In the end, the prosecutor had to condense all the charges into 12 main, most damning articles, discarding everything she had easily refuted. But even among this carefully selected panel of judges, many of whom owed their positions to the English, murmurs began to arise. One of the tribunal members, Canon Nicolas de Houppeville, could bear it no longer and openly challenged Cauchon's right to judge the case, declaring that the trial was a political farce and that testimony was being extracted by force and threats. The reaction was immediate and brutal. Houppeville was instantly seized and thrown into prison. Another respected lawyer, Jean Lohier, left the trial after one of the interrogations, stating that it had nothing to do with justice and was designed only to entrap Joan, not to find the truth. But the machine was already in motion, and it was impossible to stop it. Throughout her trial, Joan was held in conditions that were not merely cruel, but flagrantly violated every conceivable principle of the church law of that time. Canon law clearly required that women accused of heresy, especially when virginity was in question, as in Joan's case, be held in ecclesiastical prisons under the guard of women, usually nuns. This was done to protect their honor and prevent any abuse. But Joan's fate was in the hands of her mortal enemies, and they had no intention of following any rules other than the law of their own hatred. She was kept in a secular military fortress under the direct control of the English military authorities. Her guards were common English soldiers, archers, and men-at-arms who saw her not as a defendant, but as a sworn enemy, a sorceress because of whom their comrades had died on the battlefields of Orleans and Patay. Their hatred must have been animalistic, primal, mixed with crude soldiers' humor, and a desire to avenge their humiliations. They did not simply guard her, they reveled in her helplessness and humiliation, turning her every day into a hell on earth. Even in her dark and damp cell, Joan was chained by a long chain to a heavy wooden block, which severely restricted her movements, not even allowing her to lie down properly. At times, iron shackles were also placed on her legs, which dug into her skin. But that was not the worst of it. By personal order of the Earl of Warwick, 3 guards were constantly inside her cell, day and night. Another 2 stood outside the door. The 19-year-old girl had not a moment of privacy, nor any way to escape the lustful and hateful gazes of men who despised and feared her at the same time. According to the testimony of witnesses at the subsequent rehabilitation trial, the guards subjected her to constant taunts and harassment. They mercilessly mocked her, told the crudest jokes, tried to touch her, and pulled at her clothes. She lived in a state of unceasing terror and tension, expecting the worst at every moment. When she fell gravely ill, suffering from a high fever, and truly believed she was dying, she begged to be allowed to receive communion, and, in the event of her death, to be buried in consecrated ground. She was coldly and contemptuously refused. The Earl of Warwick, it is said, somewhat restrained his men, but not out of compassion or knightly nobility. He would reprimand them with the words, "The king paid a great deal of money for her, and intends to have her burned only by sentence of the court. The last thing we need is for her to take her own life in prison or die of illness." The English had paid a huge price for her, and intended to extract the maximum political benefit from her conviction. She was to die publicly as a heretic, not quietly in a cell at the hands of drunken soldiers. Her death was meant to be a spectacle. But the danger Joan faced went far beyond mere verbal persecution. According to testimony given under oath at the rehabilitation trial in 1456, during her imprisonment she faced repeated physical threats. One of the witnesses, her confessor Joan, stated directly that a certain great English lord, whose name he feared to speak even decades later, had attempted to commit physical violence against her right in the prison. Only her desperate resistance and screams saved her at that moment. This is precisely what explains why Joan so desperately and stubbornly insisted on wearing men's clothing, despite it being one of the main and most dangerous charges against her. The men's attire of that time, tight chausses, a doublet and boots, was tightly laced and tied with numerous cords, providing physical protection that a loose woman's dress could not offer. It was her only armor in a cage full of wild beasts, her last line of defense. During interrogations, she repeatedly and futilely tried to explain this to her clerical judges, who seemed more concerned with her attire than with her safety and honor. She said that wearing men's clothing while surrounded by male guards around the clock was far more decent and safer than wearing a woman's dress, which would leave her completely vulnerable. The judges, hypocritically concerned for her immortal soul, rejected this simple and logical argument. But the danger was real, and Joan knew it better than anyone else. The trial itself was riddled with flagrant violations that made it a parody of justice. Joan was interrogated for weeks before the final list of charges was officially read to her, depriving her of the opportunity to prepare a defense. She was not provided with a lawyer or legal counsel, which was a gross violation of even the minimal standards of the inquisitorial process of that time. The trial was held in Rouen, in territory controlled by the English, rather than in Joan's home diocese, which also contradicted canon law and deprived her of the support of the local clergy, who might have been more favorable to her. Furthermore, there is substantial evidence indicating that the trial records were deliberately falsified at key points. The notaries who kept the records, including the chief among them, Guillaume Manchon, later confessed under oath at the rehabilitation trial that they had been under colossal pressure from Cauchon and the English. Joan's answers were intentionally distorted, taken out of context, and edited to make them appear more compromising than they actually were. This was not a trial, but a meticulously orchestrated performance, where the verdict was written long before the first act began. On May 23, 1431, exactly 1 year after her capture, Joan was brought back to the courtroom. She was informed that theologians from the University of Paris, which was under the complete control of the English, had reviewed the 12 articles of her case. Their verdict was unequivocal and devastating. Her claims of hearing the divine voices of saints and angels were deemed the work of demons, lies, or a manifestation of madness. Her faith was declared a superstition. Her wearing of men's clothing was declared unnatural, blasphemous, and a violation of divine law. Her refusal to submit to the authority of the church militant made her a schismatic and an obstinate heretic. The sentence was as clear as day. If she did not immediately renounce her errors, she would be handed over to the secular authorities for punishment. And for heretics in those times, there was only one punishment: being burned alive at the stake. She faced a choice: betray her faith or burn. The next day, May 24th, Joan was brought out to the cemetery of the Abbey of Saint-Ouen. There, among the graves, a high scaffold had already been erected, and next to it, an executioner's stake. The sight of this place, the sight of the stake to which she would be tied, the cries of the hostile crowd gathered for the spectacle horrified her. After months of imprisonment, exhausting interrogations, constant fear and humiliation, abandoned by the king she had crowned and betrayed by the church in which she so sincerely believed, the 19-year-old girl broke. Faced with imminent, agonizing death by fire, she agreed to sign a document of abjuration. A short text was read to her in which she repented of her sins, admitted that she had deceived the people of France, and renounced her visions. Her death sentence was mercifully commuted by Cauchon to life imprisonment on bread and water. She was ordered to immediately put on women's clothing. She obeyed. It seemed the English had achieved their goal. They had not just destroyed her physically, they had made her destroy her own myth and legend herself. But Joan's abjuration lasted only a few days. Had her voices, her divine guides, finally abandoned her? Or was it merely a tactical move in a desperate attempt to survive and wait for help? Shortly thereafter, Cauchon and other judges visited her cell. They found her dressed in men's clothing again. To their angry question as to why she had done this, Joan replied that she had done it of her own free will. She declared that the voices of Saints Catherine and Margaret had appeared to her and sternly reproached her for having renounced the truth to save her mortal life. However, witnesses at the rehabilitation trial of 1456 presented a completely different, much darker, and more cynical picture. They testified under oath that the English guards had deliberately stolen her women's dress during the night and left her only her old male attire. They mocked her, forcing her to either remain practically naked before them or to put on what was available. It was the last, most despicable trap set by her jailers. Joan chose the lesser of two humiliations, defending her honor in the only way available to her. Whatever the exact circumstances, the result was predetermined and likely exactly what her enemies had sought from the very beginning. On May 28th, Bishop Cauchon and 7 other judges interrogated Joan again in her cell. She boldly repeated to them that she had resumed wearing men's clothing because it was necessary to protect her honor while imprisoned among men. She also defiantly confirmed that her voices had spoken to her again and had condemned her for her treacherous abjuration. This was more than enough. Returning to men's clothing after having sworn not to wear it was irrefutable proof of a relapse into heresy. According to canon law, a sinner who relapsed into heresy was not given a second chance. Mercy was not extended to such individuals, for it was believed that they had knowingly and perfidiously rejected God's grace. On May 29th, the judges unanimously ruled that she should be excommunicated from the church as an unrepentant, perfidious heretic and handed over to the secular authorities. The sentence was final and irrevocable, death by burning. For the English, it was a complete victory. On the morning of May 30th, 1431, Joan was allowed to confess and receive communion. This act of mercy, technically violating church law for excommunicated heretics, was perhaps the only display of humanity during her entire imprisonment, wrung from Cauchon by some of the more conscientious judges, such as Martin Ladvenu. She was then led out of her cell and taken to the old market square in the heart of Rouen, where a huge, spectacle-hungry crowd had already gathered. In the center of the square, a high stake of plaster was erected, specially constructed so that the flames would not immediately engulf the victim, prolonging her suffering and making the spectacle longer and more edifying for the crowd. According to procedure, she was supposed to be officially handed over to the bailiff of Rouen for the pronouncement of the secular sentence. But the English, in their haste to be done with the matter, broke this rule as well. They took matters into their own hands, impatiently demonstrating who the real masters were, and ordered the executioner to proceed without formalities. As Joan was roughly tied to the stake, she asked for a cross. An English soldier, whose name history has not preserved, moved by her final plea, broke 2 sticks, tied them into the shape of a cross, and handed it to her. She kissed this makeshift cross and pressed it to her breast. Then a processional cross was brought from the nearby church of Saint-Sauveur. At her request, this cross was held before her eyes as the executioner, Geoffroy Terrage, lit the kindling. As the flames began to rise, witnesses heard Joan cry out one word, one plea, again and again. Her final cry, which carried over the roar of the fire and the murmur of the crowd, was the name of Jesus. At the age of 19, the peasant girl who had changed the course of a war and the history of an entire nation perished in the market square of Rouen. The executioner, Geoffroy Terrage, later recounted in horror that her heart, full of blood, had not burned in the fire, remaining intact among the charred remains. After she was gone, the same executioner who, it was rumored, bitterly repented his deed and feared eternal damnation for having burned a saint, received strict orders to burn her remains 2 more times. This was done so that nothing would be left of the body but the finest ash. The English were terrified that people would begin to collect relics, that her bones would become shrines and banners for a new resistance. Her ashes were carefully gathered and thrown into the cold waters of the Seine from the Matilda Bridge. They believed they had erased Joan of Arc from history. Instead, they created an immortal martyr. 25 years passed. The 100 Years' War had ended in a complete French victory, thanks in large part to the irreversible momentum that Joan had set in motion. King Charles VII, in order to fully legitimize his crown and wash away the stain of shame associated with having been crowned by a condemned heretic, initiated the rehabilitation process for the one he had once so easily betrayed. At the official request of Joan's elderly mother, Isabelle Romay, a new trial was convened. 115 witnesses were questioned, from common soldiers and townspeople to judges and notaries from the first trial. The judges of the new tribunal, having studied mountains of evidence of forgeries, pressure, and countless violations, on July 7, 1456, declared that the verdict of 1431 was null and void, tainted by prejudice, corruption, and riddled with countless procedural errors, Joan's name was officially cleared of slander. But it took almost 5 more centuries for history to come full circle. In 1920, the Catholic Church canonized her, proclaiming her Saint Joan of Arc. The woman burned as a witch became one of the main patron saints of France. So what was it? The trial of Joan of Arc was never a matter of heresy or faith. It was a cold, calculated political reprisal cloaked in the mantle of religious authority. It was a desperate attempt by the English to destroy the symbol that had made France's victory possible and their own occupation unbearable. They burned her body, but her spirit, like a phoenix, rose from the ashes and forever changed the soul of France, proving that the faith of one girl can be stronger than the armies and intrigues of kings.